In this special bonus episode, we'll look into the assassination attempts of Presidents Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan, and into the assassination attempt of presidential candidate George Wallace. One attempt changed federal gun policy, and another changed the deeply held beliefs of one man. This is the history behind the crime. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a very special bonus episode of The History Behind the Crime. I'm Erin Lasley. So, I'm on vacation right now, but I didn't want to leave you yearning 3 weeks for another episode. Not that I think that, you're yearning for me, and if you are, can we not, turn this into a Jodie Foster, John Hinckley Jr. thing? Which is, it's actually a very good segue into our topic today. So that's right. After the last episode, A Decade of Assassination, Part 1, I thought we'd do, almost assassinations, or attempted assassinations. And seeing as this is a bonus episode, we're going to make it short, like me, sweet, sometimes like me, and to the point, which is never me. So I've got 2 presidents and 1 presidential candidate for you. The first is Gerald Ford. So, Gerald Ford, despite his antics falling downstairs and pardoning a president that did some pretty tricky dicky stuff, was probably one of the luckiest U.S. presidents in history. Why? Ford survived not just 1 assassination attempt, but 2 in the same month. So I know. When I was diving into this, I only remembered the Squeaky Fromme incident. But damn if another woman didn't try to kill him a few weeks later. Okay, so Lynette Alice Squeaky Fromme. How do you describe someone who was so deliciously messed up and was portrayed by Dakota Fanning in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? You should know that she was a part of the Manson family. Oh, and side note, my dogs are running around, so if you hear the jingle jangle of whatever, that's them. So Squeaky Fromme, she was part of the Manson family. She met Charlie Manson in 1967 and has been his follower and devotee ever since. Yep, even to this day. She wasn't a part of the La Bianca Tate murders, and there's no evidence that she was involved in any of the other murders the Manson families have been accused of. So there were several murders that the family may have committed, but have never been proved. So when Manson and the others stood trial for the La Bianca Tate murders, it was Squeaky who was protesting outside the courthouse, making sure all the other girls carved X's in their foreheads, and even tried to stop Manson family members from testifying. And she actually did time for that too. So after her beloved Manson went to prison, she kept on with her weird shit. She started to dress in red robes and became obsessed with the California redwood trees. And that's just skimming the surface of her weirdness. On September 5th, 1975, she thought she would like to talk to President Ford about the redwoods while he was in Sacramento, which, I mean, what else would you talk to a president about? On that day, she approached Ford with a .45 cal pistol, which was loaded, but there was nothing in the chamber. She pointed the gun at him and promptly got her ass handed to her by Secret Service agents. She claimed that she wasn't actually going to shoot the president, but just wanted to talk because, everybody points guns at, everyone else when they just want to talk. So seeing that trying to assassinate a president is a federal crime, she got convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But remember, Squeaky was also cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. In 1979, she was transferred out of a federal facility because she attacked another inmate with a hammer. And then in 1987, she actually escaped from a federal prison camp in West Virginia because she needed to visit Charlie. The poor guy had testicular cancer. I mean, it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. But don't worry, she was captured a few days later. Eventually, she was granted parole in 2009 and now lives happily in upstate New York with her boyfriend in a house decorated with skulls. Not on the inside, but on the outside. So, happy ending for her. So, on September 22nd, 1975, once again in California, another woman attempted to shoot Ford, this time in San Francisco. Sarah Jane Moore, I mean, how retro is that name, was a bit of a radical. She had this fascination for Patty Hearst, and I think that's a future episode idea. And worked as a bookkeeper for the nonprofit Randolph Hearst set up to feed the less fortunate because he had like this huge guilt trip, after his daughter was kidnapped. So get this. Not only was Sarah Jane, this bookkeeper for, this nonprofit, she was also an informant for the FBI. I mean, what the hell? Anyway, like most radicals, she was pretty damn pissed off at Gerald Ford for something and thought the best way to express herself was to kill the president. So right outside the hotel Ford had just spoke at, Sarah Jane, with a .38 pistol she had just purchased that morning, got within shooting distance of the president and boom! Pulled the trigger. What Sarah Jane didn't know was that the sights were slightly off on the gun and she missed the president's head by 5 inches. So just as she was going to pull the trigger again, a man in the crowd, and also a former Marine, hoorah, Oliver Sipple, jumped on Sarah Jane and made her miss the president again, but only to shoot taxi driver John Ludwig. Don't worry, he survived. He's fine. During this, the Secret Service practically threw Ford into his limousine with Donald Rumsfeld jumping on top of him. Personal note, I've met Rumsfeld. I used to do security patrols for him when I was in the Coast Guard. I never liked his politics, but he is exactly the kind of man that would protect a president with his own body. Anyway, President Ford and Betty Ford were rushed off on Air Force One, and Sarah Jane got arrested, tried, and convicted, and received life in prison. What happened to Oliver Sipple? This part really pisses me off. After he foiled the assassination attempt, he became a national hero until news agencies discovered he was gay. They outed him on national television. He had hid his sexuality from his parents, but after this, his parents and other family members disowned him. Never mind, he was a gosh darn hero and saved the president's life. You should feel ashamed of yourself, they pretty much said, if you're gay. I'm really glad things have changed since then, and we've become more accepting and tolerant of other people. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's right. There's still ministers out there that preach members of the LGBTQ community and their allies should be shot in the head. That was my bad. Okay, back to Sarah Jane. She was eventually paroled in 2007, a year after Ford's death. And though she didn't feel any remorse at the time she attempted the assassination, she did later admit that she was glad she failed. She was arrested again in February 2019 when she left the country without her parole officer's permission, but was released later on in the year. After the 2 assassination attempts, the Secret Service made Ford wear a bulletproof trench coat in public. And I really want to see this coat, but I can't find where it's stored or exhibited. I've seen pictures, but I want to know where it's at. So if anyone out there knows, could you please tell me? I have a feeling of road trips in my future. Not everyone can be as lucky as Ford. Sometimes failed assassination attempts are a little bit successful. On May 15th, 1972, Alabama governor and presidential hopeful George Wallace came very close to dying from an assassin's bullet. Well, bullets. Let me point out, that George Wallace. The one in Forrest Gump, standing in the doorway at the University of Alabama, blocking black students from entering. You know, the guy that said segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Yeah, That dude wasn't the nicest when it came to the rights of black Alabamians. Is it Alabamians or Alabamans? Anywho, Arthur Brimmer wasn't really a nice guy either. I can only describe Brimmer as strange and probably suffered from some sort of mental illness. He kept an assassination diary and pinned about wanting to assassinate Richard Nixon or George Wallace. Why? Had nothing to do with politics. He wanted the fame. During 1972, he followed Nixon around on the campaign trail. But when it became obvious he couldn't get that close to the president, I wonder why, Brimmer settled for his second choice, Wallace, and was a little bit disappointed because he thought the news of Wallace's death wouldn't make headlines in Europe or the Soviet Union. Why he cared about the Soviet Union, I have no idea. So Brimmer scoped his target and several times came within inches of shooting Wallace, but it never worked out for him until May 15th, 1972. Brimmer followed Wallace to Maryland and failed to get close enough to Wallace at the first campaign rally because people were heckling Wallace and throwing tomatoes at him. I wonder why. However, Brimmer managed to get close to Wallace at the second campaign event that day. At around 4 p.m., Brimmer made his way through a crowd of about 1,000 people, approached Wallace, and shot him 5 times in the chest and abdomen. A state trooper, a campaign volunteer, and a Secret Service agent were also injured. Brimmer was eventually tackled to the ground and disarmed. All those involved were rushed to the hospital. Brimmer was fine, but the state trooper had been shot in the stomach, the volunteer in the leg, and the Secret Service agent was shot in the neck. Wallace lost a lot of blood, and one of the bullets hit his spinal cord and left him paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life. After a quick and speedy trial, and I'm talking about it took a couple of months, Brimmer was convicted and sentenced to 63 years, which was reduced to 53 after an appeal. During a parole hearing in 1996, Brimmer said something along the lines that shooting a segregationist dinosaur wasn't as bad as shooting a mainstream politician. Needless to say, he wasn't granted parole at that time, but he was paroled in 2007 at the age of 56. A condition of his parole was that he stay away from politicians for obvious reasons. And Brimmer was right. He didn't make the front page in Europe or the Soviet Union. Wallace's life changed tremendously after he was shot and paralyzed. And I'm not just talking because he spent the remainder of his years in a wheelchair, but his views began to change and soften. While he was in the hospital, Shirley Chisholm, who is freaking awesome, she was also another candidate and the first black woman to run for office of the president. She visited Wallace in the hospital. She straight out told him she wouldn't wish what happened to him to happen to anyone. And Chisholm remembered Wallace broke down crying. And his daughter Peggy remarked that's when her father began to change. Wallace began to speak publicly about how he was wrong and begged forgiveness from the black citizens of Alabama he once treated so horrendously. In 1989, Wallace ran for governor of Alabama again and received 90% of the black vote. In his final years, Wallace suffered from Parkinson's and died in 1998 from septic shock. John Lewis, the famed civil rights leader and voting icon, who was also brutally beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, finally forgave Wallace. Now, I know I brought this up at the beginning of the podcast, but now I want to finish things off with the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. Before we dive too much into this, I want to say this. Secret Service agents that provide security for presidents and other high-profile individuals are no joke some of the bravest and craziest motherfuckers I have ever met. They are highly skilled, highly trained, and will not only take a bullet for someone, but can easily put a bullet in someone. I had the opportunity to work with some of them when I was in the Coast Guard, and I was in awe of them. It's especially the agents that wore these skin tight diving suits with a 45 strapped to their thighs. Talk about a thirst trap. But anyway, like Gerard Butler in the movie Olympus Has Fallen and all the other sequels has nothing on these men and women. And that's saying a lot because, Gerard Butler, he's always given me the tingles. And as much as I love those movies, as corny as they were, it always pissed me off that they killed off the Secret Service agents so quick. Not only would those agents had mopped the floor with those corny terrorists, they would have foiled the plots before it even began. Why? Because the Secret Service is also an investigatory service, constantly monitoring threatening chatter against protectees. If you make an online threat against a protectee's life, chances are the Secret Service will be knocking on your door the next day. Okay, on to Reagan. Or no, on to John Hinckley Jr. We all know that Hinckley was obsessed with Jodie Foster. Not just Jodie Foster as an actress, but specifically for her role in Taxi Driver. For those of you who haven't seen Taxi Driver, what is wrong with you? But Robert De Niro's character was loosely based on our friend Arthur Bremer. So yeah, that gave Hinckley ideas when he wanted to, impress Foster after he stalked her for years. He originally tried to assassinate Jimmy Carter, but that didn't work out well for him. So he turned his sights, okay, bad pun intended, on newly elected Ronald Reagan. Outside the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. on March 30th, 1981, Hinckley brazenly walked right up to Reagan within a few feet and shot at him with a .22 revolver. He missed Reagan, but shot a police officer, a Secret Service agent, and James Brady, Reagan's press secretary. Reagan was actually injured when a bullet ricocheted off the car and struck him in the chest. One Secret Service agent grabbed Reagan, and another agent threw both Reagan and the agent in the car and got the hell out of Dodge. Have you guys ever seen the season 2 premiere of The West Wing when the president gets shot at? That scene is based loosely on Reagan. The two agents get Reagan in the car, start to head back to the White House thinking the president's unharmed, when in reality, his lung had pretty much collapsed and the bullet stopped an inch from his heart. When agents checked Reagan a second time for wounds, the president coughed up some blood. No big deal, they thought, probably a split lip, but let's get to the hospital anyway. At George Washington University Hospital, President Reagan actually walks into the emergency room, waving to onlookers, and only when he gets inside does he collapse. That's when everybody realizes, holy shit, the president's been shot. He's finally wheeled into surgery, where he jokingly says to the doctors and nurses, I hope you're all Republicans. Bad dad joke. Vice President George H.W. Bush temporarily takes power while Reagan is under and gives it back when Reagan wakes up and is good to go. It was a peaceful transfer of power. That's how it's supposed to work. Reagan stays a few days in the hospital, waves to people from his hospital, window, and returns to the White House. Nancy spends the rest of their days in the White House taking advice from astrologers to ensure Ronnie is never shot again. I'm honest to God not joking here. The police officer and the Secret Service agent recovered from their wounds, but James Brady was shot in the head. He suffered severe brain damage and was left paralyzed on the left side of his body. The 1993 Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act was named in his honor and established background checks and waiting periods for those who wanted to buy handguns. Back when people actually cared when other people got shot. Oh my God, did she get political? Yeah, deal with it. Because Reagan went on to support the 1994 federal assault weapons ban. Brady died in 2014 as a result of his wounds. His death was ruled a homicide. So, before Hinckley can do any further damage on March 30th, 1981, and yeah, I know I'm skipping around a little bit, Alfred Antonucci, a labor official, hit Hinckley in the head and tackled him to the ground. Secret Service agent Dennis McCarthy jumped into the fray to, get this, save Hinckley's life because McCarthy didn't want another Lee Harvey Oswald scenario. He wanted Hinckley to stand trial. He pretty much had to fight off people wanting to help in order to protect Hinckley. And this one gives me the chills. The Secret Service agent that was shot, Agent Tim McCarthy, who's no relation to Dennis McCarthy, put himself between Hinckley and Reagan. He actually made himself as large as possible, spreading his hands above his head to make himself into a wall. He was struck in the lung and the liver, but survived. All I've got to say, would any of your coworkers do that for you? I actually know a few of mine that would. So Hinckley was arrested and tried, but was found not guilty by reason of insanity, which is a legal definition, not a medical definition. And just a side note on that, after he was found not guilty by reason of insanity, a lot of states started to change their laws about who can plead not guilty by reason of insanity and what you actually have to prove. Several diagnoses for Hinckley were thrown around, such as schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, and I can buy that one because of his obsession with Foster, and major depressive disorder. He was sent to St. Elizabeth's in D.C. for treatment and was a naughty boy while he was there. In 1987, he asked for permission to make a few home visits. The judge thought about it and pretty much said, I'm going to consider it, but let's search your room first. Well, not only was there the obvious evidence of a remaining unhealthy obsession for Jodie Foster, but come to find out, he had been communicating with none other than Ted Bundy. Just, how do you communicate? How does an inmate in a psychiatric hospital communicate with one of the most notorious serial killers in United States history who is on death row in Florida? I'm guessing a lot of things, like a lot of rules, have changed since then. So yeah, not only was he communicating with Ted Bundy, but there was evidence he was also trying to obtain Charlie Manson's address. Yeah, the judge was a big no-go on home visits. But the home visits, they did eventually begin, and Hinckley behaved himself. He was totally released from the hospital in 2016 by a federal judge, but Hinckley still had to wear, like, an ankle monitor. He couldn't talk to the press. He couldn't contact Foster or the Reagan family. Duh. Couldn't view pornography, and a few other things that were standard for parolees. Just a few weeks ago, on June 15th, 2022, Hinckley was fully released of all restrictions. So, that does it. The almost assassinations. I mean, yeah, there's a lot more out there, but this is a bonus episode. How about some homework? Why don't you find some pretty bizarre attempted assassinations and let me know about it? You can email me at thehistorybehindthecrime@gmail.com or contact me through Instagram at thehistorybehindthecrime. So I'll be back next time with another bonus episode about my favorite true crime heroes. Until then, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.